Resilience is the human quality that allows a person to be knocked down or even out by life and come back at least as strong. Hopefully stronger, changed but not for the worse. In every episode, we examine what qualities make someone stronger, more flexible, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. Next Set is committed to changing lives for the better. We hope you enjoy these podcasts. Hi, we're back with the Next Set podcast. I'm so excited. Christine, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You are kind of a superstar here in Utah. Really, we want to look at some of the issues related to how people deal with chronic pain, medical marijuana, mental health. You've been an advocate for those people who may not have a voice, and I'm just going to kind of pick your brain for your story. How did you originally get involved, and how did this pique your interest?
Sure. Let me start back a little bit with the why. I started the whole medical cannabis effort in 1996 at the age of 24. I was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma, which is a benign brain tumor. At the time, I was working at a hospital. I was taking specimens from the emergency room to the lab, called out to a colleague because I was experiencing some pain, and was only managed to get his name out, and then I passed out.
Wow.
I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by my colleagues, and that's when the journey began for me. They started doing some testing, and that's how they discovered the tumor. I was sent to my family physician, and more testing was done, and it was decided that I should take the risk and have surgery to have the tumor removed. It was sitting really close to my brainstem. It was not the largest tumor they've ever seen, and certainly not one that I've ever seen. I've seen patients with much larger tumors, but because of the threat where it was so close to the brainstem, they felt removal was necessary. I was given a month to put my affairs in order.
Wow.
At the time, I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I was newly divorced. And so I needed to figure out, being the sole care provider for my babies, who was going to raise my kids if things go in a direction that wasn't positive. That was very trying at 24 to sort through those emotions and try to figure out how to manage all that. At the time, my family lived in Florida and I lived in Utah. So 2,000 miles away, I was sort of thrust into these really adult decision-making things.
And you're barely out of childhood,
barely.
Basically.
I wouldn't even say that. I was, very young. 24 is really young.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 47 now, so I look back and I think, holy cow.
You were just a baby.
I was just a baby taking on some really tough things. Went ahead with the surgery, and during surgery, they got 40% of the tumor removed, and they hit a blood vessel. And I started to hemorrhage, and I slipped into a coma. And I was there for 4 days. And when I awoke, I had stroked. And so I had some speech issues, swallowing issues. I had some paralysis on my left side of my body from stroking. And I was deaf in my left ear now because of the damage done to the nerve. And I had a lot of pain, a tremendous amount of pain. But I was alive. And that was something, and I was grateful. I had more time with my babies, and that was really fantastic. But now I was left with a bunch of variables I wasn't expecting.
And being alone.
Very, yeah. That was very scary, being alone and having these little ones dependent on me. I could no longer return to the workforce. I had to apply for disability. I had to apply for housing, state housing, and food stamps so that I could make ends meet. I was on a different trajectory. I was going into nursing school. I was working at the hospital. I had a 5-year plan, and life threw me a curveball.
How did you adjust to that, where that was not the script that you'd written for your life? How did you make that a meaningful shift?
It took years. For 16 years, I suffered bedridden and housebound. I was unable to really do much until about 7 years ago. During those 16 years, I'd been on numerous pharmaceutical drugs, number of therapies, trigger point injections, nerve ablations were done, anything and everything to try to treat this chronic pain. as you can imagine, once Humpty Dumpty's cracked, there's a whole litany of other issues that kind of pop up. So I started to get a lot of other diagnoses. Fibromyalgia was one that was thrown at me. I suffer from complex migraines. A hemicranium continuum sounds a fancy name, but it's a chronic migraine. They don't know what the cure is for it. I also suffer from trigeminal neuralgia, which is a debilitating
I've known
nerve pain.
People their lives have just been utterly changed as a result of that pain.
It's a devastating condition with no known cause, no known cure, and it's also dubbed the suicide disease. There's many patients who cannot endure this pain. I was one of those patients that had hit a wall with this. At the time, like I said, 7 years ago, I was on a fentanyl patch and Percocet. I was getting Dilaudid for breakthrough pain at the emergency room. I was at a pain contract with my physician. It was a heavy lockdown trying to manage this pain, and I was getting no satisfaction. I hit another pain wall, which meant they were talking about taking me into the hospital and start winging me down off of my opioids. So I had a little bit of wiggle room because you tend to hit a ceiling. Your body metabolizes and acclimates to the dosage you're on. And then it's not enough and you need to go up. And that's where the danger comes in. That's where your physicians start telling you, this could kill you. You need to be careful. You're walking on thin ice right now. And that was the conversation that I was at. I was on thin ice trying to deal with this chronic pain. And not knowing any alternative, I started questioning if maybe medical cannabis might be an option for me. At the time, I wasn't eating. I was losing a significant amount of weight, being bedridden to the point where my husband was having to help me to the bathroom, help me bathe. I wasn't keeping my Ensure down. I wasn't keeping the applesauce down. There was talks of possibly feeding tube. Is that necessary? There was a lot of conversations going on, and I was tired of it. And I thought, well, medical cannabis might alleviate some of my symptoms. I wasn't looking for a cure with it necessarily, but I knew it helped with nausea with cancer patients. At least that's what we were told and read, forever. And so I talked to my physician about possibly using this as a remedy for what I was experiencing. And he said, don't do anything illegal. Let me send you to another pain clinic. Number 4. And so I went to another pain clinic, and they started me on an FDA-approved drug called Marinol. It's synthesized THC. They give it to cancer patients in hopes that it can help with their nausea as well. For about the first 2 weeks I was on that medication, I thought I was getting symptom relief. But the side effects were really a beast to try to deal with.
Like what kind of side effects did you?
It's pure THC. And what we know and what I've come to understand, there is a synergistic effect that goes on with all the other cannabinoids in the plant.
Right.
And when you just have the hallucinogenic or the psychotropic cannabinoid and nothing else to balance it out, you're going to get a lot of psychotropic effects. And that's not always the desired goal unless you're using it for recreational, and then it is your desired goal. But for a medical patient, we're looking for homeostasis. We want balance. That's what we're searching for. And this is stuff that I read and learned as I was being educated. And I realized that the FDA-approved drug was not offering me that whole balance that I was needing. And that's why I was having so many significant side effects with it. So in my research, I saw and found all these articles that basically educated me on what I just told you and why whole plant access would be more optimal for my health. Well, before I could find cannabis to even try, I had to have a really important conversation. And I called my father and I said, Dad, I want to use cannabis for my health. I want to see if it will work. And this was a significant phone call. My father is a narcotics officer and has been most of my life in law enforcement. He's a retired Marine. He served in Vietnam, 2 tours. My upbringing was just very different than maybe some others. I had a very different view of drugs and of this particular drug. So his support was really important to me. I'm close to my dad, and so it was significant to get his
His buy-in.
Yeah, it really was. I needed to know what he thought. It wasn't just enough to be supportive. I wanted to know what concerns.
Do you think most patients want that support from their loved ones as they seek to do the best thing, not only for themselves, but in a, like you say, in a synergistic way that will help all of their relationships?
Yes, I do. And in my journey along finding not just my health back, but in teaching advocates and other patients who have come to my organization and stuff, that is one of the things they are really concerned about. We all want acceptance.
Yeah.
We all want validation, love, and support in our journeys, and especially when we're going through trials and tribulations pertaining to health, physical health or mental health specifically. We need that love and support. So I think many people, when they come to wanting to start talking about wanting to use cannabis, their immediate thoughts are, what is my family going to think?
Give us some suggestions on what families can do to be supportive as somebody's exploring options that are outside of like prescription opioids.
Listen. I think that's true for anything and everyone, is listen first. Listen with compassion first to hear where they are and what struggles they're going through. Because I think when you understand that this is not a solution they come to lightly. It really isn't. I mean, this was my last resort. And in my journey, I know it shouldn't be my last resort. It should be something that should be right there in the forefront. I've journeyed 7 years on this issue. But for newly patients who are coming to this,
it's a big decision.
It is. It really is a big decision. One of the things we talk about in our organization with our other advocates is that this conversation has to happen at the kitchen table. Before you can ever show up on the Hill to advocate for it, you got to be able to sit down and talk to your kids.
Why do we demonize alternative options to pain management?
Ignorance. It's
just a lack of listening.
I think it's ignorance. I think we our policy tends to be fear-driven. If you look at prohibition around cannabis in the 1930s, 1937, when the Marijuana Act came online, it was out of ignorance. It was racist-based, and it was propaganda. There was an agenda, and that's true for all politics. All you have to do is look what's happening on our national scene right now to understand that there are agendas that people have. Right or wrong, whichever side you're on, it doesn't matter. But what I'm telling you is all sides have agendas. Everybody has an agenda. And there was an agenda to make cannabis prohibitive. There's a long history with Rockefellers and the pharmaceutical company and everything else that would take a whole nother hour for me to dive into.
And I'm actually familiar with that, believe it or not.
See? And so you understand that there is an agenda.
There is. In terms of a lot of things medically. I mean, we can even have a total conversation on cancer treatments as well.
Oh, my heavens. Well, and we've gotten so far away from food being medicine. I mean, and how we treat our bodies. We've turned to pills and chemistry as health, and it's wrong. And it's going to take a while to sort of, turn that boat, as it were, because it's a large sort of 90 years of prohibition. We've seen all kinds of disease states pop up in those 90 years, and we know that our body has an endocannabinoid system that's not been fed, and not with proper healthy nutrition. We don't know how to do a lot of things. There's a lot of ignorance right now, and so I see a very huge historic movement happening. In the past 20 years, we've seen validation that there is medicinal use in cannabis, which is huge. We know that there's research been going on for the past 60 years, in Jerusalem and everything else. But I'm looking forward to see how we adopt our policies as we see more and more research come up on cannabis. Patient stories like mine emerge, where you see somebody using cannabis who then can come off of all their pharmaceutical drugs. I'm on no opioids.
Wow.
I use cannabis to come off. I used it to help with my symptoms of coming off of opioids, because that's not very pleasant either.
No, I've seen that. And
it's pretty rough.
It's rough. And people are looking for alternative options. They're looking to try something that's a better option that they've had in the past. How do you support these new patients and, people who are just really, they're lost. They're looking for opportunities to improve everybody wants to improve their life at some level.
They do. And we get phone calls and messages every day. New patients hearing about either the law that's passed in Utah, they want a better understanding of what's legal and what's not, or just to the very basics of, I have decided I'm going to do this. I need help in dosing. How do I do that? How do I get started? And there's so much out there for them to sort of lean to, and they don't know what's real and what's not. It's an emerging market, if you will. So there's a lot to learn. What I would caution patients about is reading. I mean, they really need to read about products that are on the market, what is legal within their own states, and read more about their disease state and what is realistically beneficial for them. A lot of people come into this thinking that cannabis is a panacea and it's going to cure all their ailments. And I must caution those who listen to your program that it's not a panacea. It's not going to work for every patient. Not every patient gets the same result, even at the same disease state.
And it's my understanding that really about 50% of people, up to 50% of people, can be non-responders.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those that is a non-responder, whereas my, family members very much rely on that pain relief. Whereas for me, it's, it doesn't do anything. So for me to be advocating against what they need doesn't make much sense, just because I don't respond. My body doesn't respond in the same way.
Well, and I think it's up to advocates to be cautious on what they're advocating or how they're advocating. Because I have come across advocates who say that cannabis can cure everything. It is like, that is it. And while I appreciate their enthusiasm and their passion for the movement, I feel like it's not entirely honest because of what you just stated. Not every patient reacts to this. Everybody's endocannabinoid system is sensitive and different. Some people have enough. Their body is like, hey, we're tuned up, we're good, we don't need anything more. Others, I need a high amount because of where my disease state is. We have to be careful on either side of the spectrum, not to push one way or the other.
It's so funny that you say that. I'm a dietitian, and so from a dietetic perspective, I have people asking me all the time, "What's the best diet? What's the right diet?" And being in the profession for as many years as I have, there is no right diet. There is no one size fits all. And so you're basically saying the same thing.
It is. Well, it's specialized medicine.
It is specialized, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there are patients who are going to, just for my pure ignorance, who are going to need more broccoli than others because the nutrition that's in that is needed for their body type.
Right. So keto is really popular right now. It's not going to be advantageous for everybody to be on keto. Right. Even though that may work sell books or podcasts.
Exactly.
I agree with what you're saying. There is no one size fits all. We are unique individuals and we need to educate ourselves, don't we? You're advocating that we become educated as consumers about our own bodies.
You have to, and that's, in my opinion, if I can be so bold, that's where I feel like we have gotten lazy as consumers. We turned to pharmaceuticals and doctors and said, fix me.
Wow.
And that's not right.
So
it's your responsibility to fix yourself.
That is a powerful quote, and you will be requoted. But it is our responsibility as individuals, whether it's nutrition, fitness, pain management, to really look at ourselves as individuals different from even the people in our own family. Genetically, we're different.
We are.
So how did you, once you found the combination that worked for you, how did you then take that and bring it into advocacy? So
after I had my conversation with my dad, he was super supportive. And he says, you should try it, Chrissy. And I said, well, Daddy, I'm in a state that doesn't have medical cannabis. It's not legal here. And with a pause, and I could swear I could hear the laughter in his voice. He says, Chrissy, I'm sure you can find a bag of cannabis somewhere in Utah. And I did. And wasn't the last bag, by the way. I did find a bag of cannabis, and I did use it. And within seconds, I got relief from my nausea, and I was stunned. Because of my want and desire to be in the medical field, I started documenting. That's what you do. So I was documenting. Of course. Because, for me, I needed to know that there was something that was actually happening. I needed to be able to look paper and see that, oh, I did feel better. Oh, my pain level was at a 7. You know,
would you recommend that for anybody trying something new?
I would, just for this reason, because there's so many different cultivars of cannabis, or strains. Some people know them as strains, but cultivars of cannabis. And it helps if you know what you're taking and how it affects you, because there are different terpenes and those are like essential oils.
Yeah, exactly.
There are different terpenes and stuff that are in different cultivars that some patients have reactions to, positive or negative. And it's important for you to document that so you know what you're getting as best as you can, you know?
It seems as if you can work better with your healthcare provider at that point where you're able to show on these days, these were the results.
And also too, I stopped coming in for shots. My doctor just stopped seeing me. That was the biggest tell. When I went in to see him, I said, I don't think I need 60 Percocets this month.
Wow.
Let's try 45. And let's try 30 this month. And I'm just going to cut these in half and see how that goes.
Did you find that your healthcare provider was willing to work with you? I don't
think he had any choice. I'm a bit obstinate. And when I found that it was working, I was determined. And I think for him, ideally, our goal with me was to keep my pain medicine at a low end of things.
So you really had a specific goal for yourself.
I did. I'd been on pharmaceuticals for 16 years, and I was literally dying. I mean, I wasn't existing. I was just, let me rephrase that. I was just existing. I wasn't living.
Just to reiterate, what are some of the side effects from pharmaceuticals that you were not enjoying?
Well, the nausea was the biggest one, but being lethargic and having no energy, no ability to be up and moving. My vertigo was always really bad because of the pharmaceutical drugs. At the time, I weighed 100 pounds more than I do now. The pharmaceutical drugs, I craved carbs and sugars and and then that kind of cyclical lifestyle where you're just eating, you're non-moving, you're depressed. I mean, there's just nothing to live for. I suffered from migraines, so I lived in a dark room all the time.
So you were really at the last stop. This was the last resort.
Yeah,
I can see as you're describing this, that is no way to live. It's like
it wasn't.
It's no quality of life at all.
And my pain cycles, my pain gets to the point where it's so severe that I have body tremoring. My whole body tremors. And I writhe like I'm running a marathon. Like I can't crawl away from the pain. It's maddening. It's brought me to the brink of attempted suicide. And that was where I was at. I had cut on my hand, my arm. My husband took me to the emergency room. The doctor says, we can give you pain medicine to get you comfortable this evening. And I knew that was just going to give me a rebound within 24 hours. And I'd just be just as miserable. And I just said, no, that's not where I'm going anymore. I've done this for so long and it has failed me. This is not the answers for me. I need something else. And that's when within weeks I found cannabis and moved on my journey. So 2 weeks after using cannabis, documenting what was happening, an unintended consequence happened. I started to get pain relief. The nausea was quick and immediate, but the pain relief of constantly using cannabis for 2 weeks straight, several times a day, constantly, I was shocked. I wasn't expecting that. That was something that kind of blew me. Within 6 months, I was driving again. Within 8 months, I found my way to Capitol Hill.
Wow.
I started advocating on social media. My son, I had been disconnected from society. I really just was not plugged in. 1996 is when I went down, and that's when the World Wide Web came up. So I was not engaging with the world, 8 years ago. My son, who was in high school, taught me how to use Facebook, of all things. He taught me how to use Facebook, and he said, Mom, you got to get in here and see what's going on. So those who are listening, I bypassed MySpace. Don't even know what that was. I jumped right over
Probably
it.
not a bad idea.
Right? But I found Facebook. He taught me how to find these little groups, for my brain tumor and different, little support groups. And in each group, I could word search cannabis or marijuana, pot, whatever slang term. And anybody who had an intelligent conversation about the topic or made a remark that I felt was intelligent, I private messaged them. I told them my story. I engaged with them. I said, I'm starting, a grassroots movement. Would you be interested? And they would say yes, and I'd throw them in my little Facebook group.
Wow.
I would show up at coffee shops. I just was a collector of people. That's what I was doing.
There was no ulterior motive for you.
No.
You were just feeling that relief yourself, and you wanted to reach out to others.
I wanted others to experience this. 16 years is a long time. It's a long time. And I felt with my narrative, my story, my origin story, my dad being a narcotics officer, I'm a middle-class white woman. I'm privileged. I really am. And I felt like it was important for me to share my truth. And if it added to this collective choir of people who were experiencing the same thing and we could change policy, that was fantastic. I wanted my children to know that when you meet an unjust law and you find conflict within yourself and with what is going on in society, you have to speak up. It's a moral obligation, being part of the human race.
It is.
And
the drive gets stronger as you get older.
It does.
And you care less what other people think.
You do. And that's kind of where I was at. I felt, my youngest at the time when I was discovering this, he was 4. And there was always that threat that I speak out about this, they can come after and take my little one. They're not going to take the teenagers; they'll give them back. It was the 4-year-old that I was worried about, and but I knew that I couldn't use this botanical and not share this truth with my children. I only used cannabis for 3 days before I finally broke down and told my kids, "We got to have a family talk." This is something that I've told you guys to stay away from. You guys know Grandpa. Grandpa knows what's going on. It was Mom and Dad sat down and had to talk with the kids about what was happening and how we had to be quiet about it. And our neighbors couldn't know or couldn't. We had to be careful about who came over to the house. What if they smelled stuff? It was a very weird thing. But all of that experience brought me to the realization that policy had to be changed. We cannot live like this in our state. Patients shouldn't have to live like that. This is a last resort at trying to carve out some kind of existence. We can't live in shame. And we needed some legal parameters that would provide some kind of safety. So on Facebook, as I'm gathering these people, one of these advocates sends me a flyer that says, "Hey, this lady's giving tours up at the Capitol right before the session starts. Maybe you should go to that." And I did. And this lady who is with a coalition of religious communities, they focus solely on poverty issues and the homelessness and food tax and all those things that affect our low income brothers and sisters in our community. And I took the tour. I started asking her questions, and she said, the legislative session starts next week. You should come back, and I'll teach you how to lobby. And I was, okay.
Wow.
At the time, I was still using my cane. And you saw me walk into the studio. I don't have a cane now. So I drove to the Capitol every day. And for 45 days, I was up on the Capitol with my little handicap sticker, my little cane, watching this lady, her name's Linda Hilton, watching her advocate, watching her pull legislators out and give them a one-pager that has different points about the bill she's following. And that was my introduction to how does a bill become a law, because it's not like the Schoolhouse Rock video. There's not a cute little Bill standing on those steps just singing a tune and it's all going to be good.
That's so true.
It is a lot harder. It is a lot harder than I anticipated. I don't know what I was thinking when I showed up to the Hill. I thought if I lent my voice and told the right person, somebody would go, "Oh yeah, of course, let's make this a law." It took years. That first year learning, I would go back on my own time, not with her little group, and start talking to legislators. I would pull them out and tell them my story, and it's not exactly what they wanted to hear.
What were some of the responses that you received initially?
They weren't very warm because I was coming at them with, at the time, there was a CBD bill on the Hill for the epileptic children that was being pushed. And I was up there saying, wait a minute, that's not proper science that you're teaching. That is not the only medicinal part of the plant. CBD doesn't have nearly the research that THC and the rest of the cannabinoids have. There's a lot more going on than you guys understand. They didn't want to hear that. They were just barely hearing from these moms that this CBD might help. And that's what they wanted everybody to have. It's not going to get you high. That's all you need. I wasn't happy with that. I came back the next year, this time with a senator. I found a senator who was working on pushing a bill. He himself had a story behind it. I shared my story with him, and he was floored. You know, he had heard that this has happened for patients. He'd not met someone like me. And I said, well, and I've got a group of patients, by the way, and we can come up and we can advocate for your bill. And that's what I did. So I worked with Senator Mattson, myself, and then there was another gentleman, Connor Boyack, who runs a libertarian think tank. He was sort of our policy wonk, if you will. He knew the process better than I do. I was just a mom from Kaysville who showed up and said, this ought to be a law. And he says, I know how to help Senator Mattson make that happen. And so the three of us as a team tried for 2 years on the Hill to raise awareness, not just on the Hill, but in the paper, in the community. 2015 and 16 was amazing years because we really pushed the envelope on cannabis awareness.
How did you overcome the stigma or the name calling or the, you know, just the resistance in general to such a giant change in an uber conservative state?
It was all about messaging. One of the things I knew going out is our branding needed to be very mindful about the conservative state we live in. So right out of the gate, good or bad, those who follow me may have pushback on this, we decided not to promote the cannabis leaf. We just pulled that out of any of our marketing. It wasn't the center focus because it has so many emotional things attached to it. It's a sign of rebellion. It's also a sign for others as a very healing, loving, and peaceful thing, but it has a lot of emotions wrapped into it. And I needed to put that aside. I needed people to see, I needed politicians, elected officials, powers in the state to see people, not resistance, not protest, but people. I needed them to see their brothers and their sisters and their aunt and their uncle and their neighbor, their colleague. That's who I needed them to see. And if they were so caught up in you branding, you know, some sort of protest, they would not be receptive to your message. So out of the gate, that was the biggest thing.
Did you find that a lot of these lawmakers had personal stories to tell you about people in their life that may be related to opioid addiction, or that they were also looking for solutions?
I had a mix of stories that came at me. I had legislators, elected officials who had very strange stories blaming cannabis for, you know, like a sibling killing their parent. I was shocked to hear that story. We do, just so that your listeners know, there is people who are predisposed to psychosis, schizophrenia or anything. Cannabis can agitate those, but it really is people who are already predisposed to that. And cannabis doesn't cause schizophrenia. I think people need to understand that. So we had, you know, elected official who was touting that. We had other elected officials who were saying that it was a gateway drug. That has been disproven for years and years and years. In fact, my national organization I'm affiliated with forced the federal government to remove that false narrative from their website because it is a false narrative. Cannabis is not a gateway drug any more than breast milk is a gateway drug. You can't, you know, causation and coalition. They're not the same. It's not. And so there's a lot of pushback from our legislative officials because I was dealing with propaganda we've all been brainwashed to believe. So I don't hold a resentment towards that ignorance because I grew up with it. You know, the just say no. I mean, that was my whole, you know, teen years. Nancy was touting that in the whole DARE program. So we all are subjected to that brainwashing. The hard thing is with legislators, there's a more, I think, conservative approach because I think they try to be careful that they're speaking for so many people. Right. And so I think there's a lot of nervousness about adopting this idea.
So they may err on the side of
caution.
Very cautious. Like
probably more so than they correct. And some of them probably more so than they personally, because what I would find more oftentimes than not, I had two opinions. I had their public opinion,
interesting.
Their elected public opinion, and then it was, Christine, let me tell you. And they would tell me, I have a cousin who has Crohn's disease, or my mother was dying of breast cancer, and the lady in her ward was bringing her cannabis-infused brownies, and it you know, it gave her a better quality of life. There's so many stories that I have heard in this state that we have a loving loving population. That they don't care about breaking the law when it comes to
Their
easing the
loved ones.
suffering. And loved ones can mean in their own ward. That's what I'm saying. There are stories that I have heard of active LDS members, because that's the first thing many advocates want to do is attack the LDS members or the church itself. And for the sake of our conversation, I am going to speak of two different sides. There's the ecclesiastical side of the church, and then there's LDS Inc. And I had to deal with LDS Inc. and the business side of policy making. And because I advocate for those who practice the faith, who very much believe in this plant and its medicinal values and love their church very much. And so they were put into middle of turmoil. And so as their advocate, I wanted to make sure that they understood that we're not beating up your church. We're not going after them for them not understanding. And because we took that approach, and because we encouraged and supported those members that were with us, they were able to have dialogues with their bishops and their other ward members. And really, they were helping move this issue in a profound way. I mean,
it really, really is truly a grassroots effort.
Absolutely.
Like, truly boots on the ground.
Absolutely. There was no other way. We here in Utah, and I don't know how far your broadcast goes, but we ran 4 initiatives. One was just a question, but there were 3 initiatives on our ballot that we were able to vote for. And all 3 of those won and passed. They were all things that we were very emotionally compassionate about. One was Medicaid expansion and medical cannabis. We want to help those who are ill and afflicted in our state. And it was obvious with the support. We were polling at 78% support for medical cannabis. That's phenomenal in such a conservative state. It was a vicious little fight to get, Prop 2 passed. It is passed. We had some undermining happen with the legislative body coming in and replacing that bill and putting in something else that's really kind of messy. That honestly is another topic. I'll take up another hour trying to dive into the policy. But I think what your listeners need to know is compassion won. We won the debate at the end of the day. No matter what's dried on paper, at the end of the day, we saw people see each other and said, you know what? It's not my right or job to say, no, you can't have access. I may never use it, but I don't want to prevent you from having that ability.
Is this a basic civil rights question?
It is. It absolutely is.
Do you find similarities between what happened in the 60s and what's happening now? Like what happened, with Martin Luther King and how he really had to get in there and have people see each other.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. The thing about this issue, too, is it crosses party lines. One thing with our organization, when I would bring people and advocates in, I'm like, you're going to have to get rid of your label. You're not a Democrat. You're not a Republican. You're not a Libertarian. You're not LDS. You're non-LDS. You're not those labels. You're a human being first, and your fellow advocate is a human being who is suffering just like you are. And so I saw people at the same table collecting signatures and advocating and tabling and talking about cannabis who probably wouldn't have
What
normally.
a beautiful opportunity. I've worked in Washington, D.C., so I know how impossible that is.
It is.
That just does not happen.
It doesn't happen. And to see it happen and to be somewhat a part of that, to create, to be the catalyst for something like that to happen,
what do you
was
see?
amazing.
What do you see happening in the next 5 years with this community as they embrace kindness and seeing each other? Do you see this leading to other changes in healthcare, in quality of life, as we kind of start to attempt to get rid of labels, Republican, Democrat, conservative?
I saw a lot of beautiful things happen with this movement, and I saw some very powerful people not like what happened with this movement. And the whole other conversation that we can have at another time was how politics got involved and really caused a rift. And it's going to take a lot of conscious effort on all of our parts to say, no, we will not be divided again. That's not how we're going to play this anymore. It has done nothing but harm us as a community to keep us divided like this. I want us to bring us back to center where we can have that dialogue and conversation again. I'm hoping that the hurt from special session will start to ease. At least for me, it's starting to a little bit. I want to see I want to see movement in a positive direction. I need us to listen to each other, though.
So we have children, I assume, that are the same age. I know that my children are very different than my generation. They're very accepting. They don't understand these divisions. They don't understand the judgment. They don't understand why somebody would legislate against somebody else just based on a belief that works for that one person.
Right.
Do you see a rising generation that is going to handle these issues differently than they've been handled in the past?
Absolutely. Even with my youngest is now 11, he speaks very differently. He uses different language because he was taught different language, and that's always the hope that the generation next improves on the generation before. And I have no doubt that we're going to see amazing things from our upcoming generation.
What would you like to see in the next 5 years? What would you like to see or have transpire in this community?
Definitely more dialogue in a productive manner. There's a lot of we're listening, but we're not hearing you. So I'd like to see that happen. But I would also like to see more individuals in the community becoming less apathetic about politics. You don't necessarily have to party affiliate to be involved in the process. I'm focused solely on this issue. I try to attend what political things I can, so I'm aware of who is doing what. But people should be involved. I know it's a scary thing to be involved in politics, but what happens when you're not is you're relying on your neighbor to make decisions best for you.
Wow, that's powerful. If you're not involved in politics, you are relying on your neighbor who knows nothing about the issues.
About the trials that are affecting you. Yeah. And as much as I love my neighbors, they don't know what trials and tribulations I go through, and they can't make that judgment call for me. And I wouldn't want them to. So I'm hoping in the next 5 years we see more engagement from the community as a whole. Right now I'm trying to work with other organizations to help build a coalition of people who are wanting change. It doesn't matter what your issue is. The rules are all the same in politics. I want to give people the tools so whatever political flavor they're affiliated with, they can be the best at being the best advocate in that arena, whatever it is. I feel like a lot of people don't know the rules to the game, or they have the wrong rules to the game. You know, if we're playing chess and they're using checkers.
True.
And like, if I could just teach you, and that's what I did with my advocates, if I can just teach you the process, if you could just find out what a committee hearing is and when interim is and when these certain dates happen and why it's important for you to be involved in caucusing. If you learn all these silly little terminologies, it's not foreign to you anymore.
So it's educating people on a new vocabulary.
Yes, I want them engaged. It's not as scary as it sounds. I mean, I went from a woman who was bedridden, housebound, and wasn't engaged in her community at all to leading a grassroots movement in Utah and taking this to D.C. and pushing policy and getting a senator on a bill on the federal level. It's
so amazing.
One person can make a difference.
Wow.
And everyone should try.
Wow.
Right?
Thank you so much for really reminding us that one person does make a difference, and that we are passionate about things that matter, that we are passionate about things that other people need in their lives as well, and that we as citizens have a responsibility to our community and to each other to advocate for each other, for a better world, pain relief for those who need that option. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thanks for coming in. We've learned so much today.
Thanks,
you.
Christine.